Welcome back to the channel. These stories are meant for late nights, quiet rooms, and headphones on. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight. Now, let's begin the first story. I moved to Coldwater Ridge because it was cheap and because I wanted quiet. The house sat at the edge of a small development where the pavement simply stopped and gave way to trees. Not scenic trees, not the kind people took pictures of, just dense, unmanaged forest that swallowed sound and light after sunset. There were maybe 6 other houses on the road, each spaced far enough apart that you couldn't see your neighbors unless you walked down to the mailbox. At night, it felt like the world ended at the tree line. I had been living there a little over a year when everything happened, and up until then, nothing had ever felt off. The house was old but sturdy, built sometime in the late 70s, with thick walls and creaky floorboards that complained whenever the temperature dropped. Winters there were brutal. Snow came early and stayed late. Once it settled in, the entire place felt sealed off from the rest of the world. That particular weekend was one of the coldest I could remember. Temperatures stayed well below zero and snow drifted down on and off for 3 straight days. Roads iced over, plows came through once and then disappeared. I took the time off work and stayed inside, content to let the storm pass. I stocked up on food, barely checked my phone, and didn't leave the house at all. By Sunday night, cabin fever had set in. I ate dinner, cleaned the kitchen, and tried to distract myself with television until my eyes felt heavy. Around 11, I shut everything off and headed to bed. The house settled into its nighttime sounds, the faint ticking of pipes and the low groan of wind pressing against the siding. There's something I need to explain about my bedroom door. For months before this happened, the lock hadn't worked. It was a simple push-button lock on the knob, the kind you see in most older homes. One night, I noticed it didn't hold anymore. You could press it in, but the door would still open from either side. I thought about replacing it, but the idea never felt urgent. I lived alone. The exterior doors were solid and always locked. The bedroom door felt like a formality. I told myself it didn't matter. That night, I went to sleep like any other. I don't know what woke me. There was no sound, no nightmare that I could remember. I just snapped awake with my heart racing, like my body had decided something was wrong before my mind caught up. The room was pitch black. No moonlight, no streetlights, just shadows. Then I saw the door. It was open. Not wide, just enough to notice. A thin slice of darkness cutting into the room where there hadn't been one before. I stared at it for several seconds, trying to rationalize it away. Old houses shifted in the cold, doors moved, air pressure changed. Still, I felt that unmistakable internal alarm go off. I got out of bed quietly and crossed the room, careful not to turn on any lights. I pulled the door shut and pressed it gently to make sure it latched. I stood there for a moment, hand still on the knob, listening. Nothing. I went back to bed, but the feeling didn't leave. My body stayed tense, muscles tight, senses stretched thin. I stared at the ceiling, eyes burning, convinced sleep would come if I just forced myself to relax. 30 minutes passed. Then I heard something. A soft sound, barely there, like a foot shifting on wood. It came from somewhere beyond my room, either the hallway or the bottom of the stairs. I held my breath and listened harder. Silence. I stayed sitting up in bed, afraid if I moved I'd miss whatever came next. My thoughts spiraled, trying to label the noise as something harmless. The house settling, pipes, wind. Eventually, exhaustion dragged me under. The next time I woke up, it was worse. Same sudden jolt, same racing heart, same door. Cracked open again. This time, I didn't move right away. I lay there staring at the opening, watching the darkness beyond it like it might shift or breathe. I knew with absolute certainty that I had closed it properly before. As I started to sit up, something moved. Not in my room, just outside the doorway. A subtle shift in shadow, like someone stepping back into the hall. No sound accompanied it, no footfall, no breath, just movement. Every instinct screamed at me to stay still. I sat frozen, barely breathing, waiting for something to happen. Seconds dragged into minutes. My legs cramped, my hands tingled. Finally, panic overrode fear. I rushed to the door and slammed it shut, pressing my weight against it. I expected resistance, a shove back, a hand on the other side. Nothing came. For several long seconds, there was only silence. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, controlled, moving away from my door and down the hall. I listened as they descended the stairs, each step deliberate. When they reached the bottom, there was a pause, followed by the faint sound of the back door opening and closing. I didn't wait. I called the police immediately, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what I wasn't even sure I'd experienced. Officers arrived within 10 minutes and searched the house from top to bottom. Every room, every closet. Nothing was disturbed, nothing was missing. They chalked it up to a possible attempted break-in and told me I'd done the right thing by calling. As we stood in the kitchen talking, one of them asked where I thought the person had gone. I pointed towards the backyard. That's when I saw him. Just a shape at first, barely visible through the trees, a tall silhouette standing where the forest thickened. He didn't move until my eyes locked onto him. Then he stepped back and disappeared into the woods. The officers rushed outside, but there was nothing to find. No tracks visible through the snowstorm, no sound. I didn't stay there that night. Over the next few weeks after the snow melted, I noticed things I hadn't before. Narrow paths worn into the forest behind my house. Trails that didn't belong to animals. They led straight towards my property. And one of the back windows didn't lock properly. I moved shortly after. But even now, years later, I still think about the door. About how long that lock had been broken. And I wonder how many times it wasn't. I didn't go back to the house alone. The morning after, I stayed at a friend's place. The sun was already up when we returned, but it didn't make the place feel safer. Snow still covered the ground, uneven and dirty, near the driveway where my tires had spun the night before. The trees behind the house looked the same as they always had, tall and crowded, their bare branches scratching against one another in the wind like they were whispering. The police said it was fine to go back. They'd already done a sweep. No forced entry, no signs of anyone hiding nearby. Just another suspicious incident, the kind that gets written down and slowly forgotten. But I knew better. Inside, nothing looked disturbed. Furniture was exactly where I left it. The kitchen chairs were tucked in, the living room rug was straight. Even my bedroom looked untouched, the door closed now like it had always behaved. That almost made it worse. Whoever had been there hadn't rushed, they hadn't panicked. They hadn't knocked things over or left a mess. They'd moved through my home like it belonged to them. I packed a bag that morning with the intention of staying elsewhere until I figured out what to do. Clothes, laptop, important documents. While I was in the bedroom, my eyes kept drifting to the door, to the cheap, useless lock. I pressed it in and pulled. The door opened easily. I felt sick. Before leaving, I walked to the back of the house and looked out the window again. In daylight, the woods didn't look as intimidating, but I could see more clearly now. Slate depressions in the snow, irregular lines that didn't match animal tracks. Too straight, too purposeful. Paths. Someone had been walking back there, repeatedly. Over the next few days, I didn't sleep much. Every creak in my friend's apartment set my nerves on edge. I replayed the sounds in my head over and over. The door opening, the footsteps, the pause at the bottom of the stairs. The police called once to say there were no updates. I decided to go back to the house one last time with a contractor to check the locks and windows. I told myself I needed closure, needed proof that I was safe. He started at the front of the house and worked his way around, testing each window. When he reached the back, he stopped. "This one doesn't lock," he said, tugging gently at the frame. I asked him how long he thought it had been like that. "Hard to say. Looks like it's been forced before. Bent just enough that it won't catch." The realization hit me slowly, settling in my stomach like a weight. The broken bedroom lock, the faulty window, the worn trails in the woods. None of it was random. I called the police again, more insistent this time. An officer came out and walked the property with me. He crouched near the tree line, examining the ground where the snow had thinned. "Looks like someone's been back here," he admitted. "Hard to tell how long." I asked if they could do anything. He hesitated. Without a suspect, without evidence of a crime beyond trespassing, there wasn't much they could pursue. He suggested motion lights, cameras, a security system. All reasonable things. None of them addressed the part that terrified me the most. Someone had been close enough to learn my routines. That night, I didn't stay. I moved what I could into storage and officially put the house on the market the following week. While packing, I noticed small things I couldn't prove but couldn't ignore either. A kitchen drawer slightly out of order, mud smudged faintly on the basement floor that hadn't been there before. A towel in the bathroom that felt stiff, like it had been used and dried again. The thought crept in slowly, unwanted and impossible to shake. What if that night wasn't the first time he'd been inside? The house sold quickly. Cheap properties always do. I didn't tell the buyers everything. I told myself I wasn't sure enough, that maybe I was overreacting. But I left that place with a constant knot in my chest and a fear I couldn't name. Months passed. I moved to a different town, then another. Apartment buildings, busy streets, places with noise and people and light. I replaced locks immediately wherever I went. I checked windows obsessively. I slept with lights on for a long time. Eventually, the fear dulled. Until one evening in early fall. I was walking home from the grocery store when I noticed something off about my building's back lot. The dumpsters had been shifted. The ground behind them was flattened. Grass pressed down like someone had stood there for a while, watching the back door. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to breathe. I told myself it was nothing, a coincidence, someone cutting through the lot. That night, I double-checked every lock before bed. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. Not to a sound, just that same familiar rush of adrenaline, that sudden certainty that something was wrong. My bedroom door was closed, locked, solid. I lay still, listening. There were footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. Slow, measured, passing. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The steps paused near my door. I heard fabric brush against the frame, a faint scrape like a hand testing the handle without turning it. Then the footsteps continued down the hall. I waited until morning to call the police. They found nothing, no camera footage, no witnesses. I moved again not long after. Now, years later, I live somewhere I won't name. I don't share my address with many people. I don't post about where I am. I don't take shortcuts home through dark areas. I don't sleep without checking every door. Sometimes, late at night, I wake up and listen. And when everything is quiet enough, when the world seems to hold its breath, I think about the woods behind that old house, about the paths worn into the ground, about how long someone had been there, watching, waiting. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that whoever it was didn't just disappear. They just learned to be patient. I moved into that apartment because it was cheap, and because I was tired of sharing walls with people who argued at 2 a.m. The listing didn't lie. It was old. The kind of old where the floors dipped slightly toward the center of each room and the radiators hissed like they were alive. The building sat on the far edge of town, just past the last grocery store where the sidewalks cracked and the streetlights grew farther apart. Most people I knew warned me against it. They said the place had a reputation for being forgotten. At the time, that sounded perfect. The building had 4 floors and maybe 12 units total, but when I moved in, only a few lights ever turned on at night. Within the first couple of months, even those disappeared. Tenants moved out quietly, one by one. No farewell conversations, no moving trucks lingering in the lot, just empty windows and locked doors. I asked the landlord once if new people were coming in. He shrugged and said, "Eventually." Eventually never came. By the time fall rolled around, I was fairly certain I was the only one left. You notice things when you're alone like that. Sounds, mostly, or the absence of them. The hallways were so quiet I could hear my own footsteps echo from one end of the floor to the other. When I ran my dryer in the basement laundry room, the low rumble carried through the stairwells like thunder trapped in concrete. Sometimes I would stop on the stairs just to listen, half expecting another door to open somewhere. It never did. Halloween was approaching when the unease started to set in. I worked late that night, came home tired, and didn't bother decorating or buying candy. It felt pointless. No kids ever came around here. There weren't enough families in the area, and even if there were, no parent in their right mind would let their kid wander into this building. I dropped my bag by the couch, kicked off my shoes, and sat down to scroll through my phone. The silence felt heavier than usual. At exactly 9 o'clock, someone knocked on my door. Not a timid knock, not someone unsure. 3 firm hits, evenly spaced. I froze on the couch, heart instantly racing. It had been months since anyone had knocked on my door, longer since I'd seen another person inside the building. For a moment, I honestly wondered if I'd imagined it. Then the knock came again. I stood slowly and walked to the door. I didn't open it right away. I leaned close, listening. Nothing. I cracked the door just enough to see into the hallway. A child stood there. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. She wore a cheap costume, something store-bought, with a plastic mask pushed up onto her forehead. In her hands was a small trick-or-treat bag, completely empty. She didn't smile. She didn't say anything. She just looked up at me, eyes flat and unreadable. I stared at her longer than I should have, trying to process what I was seeing. "Where are your parents?" I finally asked. She didn't answer. "Do you live here?" I asked again, glancing down the hallway. There were no other doors open, no adults waiting nearby. The building was silent. She tilted her head slightly, like she was considering the question, then turned around and walked away. That was it. She didn't knock on any other doors, didn't stop, didn't run. She just walked calmly toward the stairwell and disappeared down it. I closed my door and locked it, my hands shaking more than I wanted to admit. Something about the encounter felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Kids get lost. Kids wander. I told myself that. But nothing about her behavior felt accidental. And how had she even gotten into the building? A few minutes later, curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my jacket and stepped into the hallway. It felt colder than my apartment, the air stale and unmoving. I listened for footsteps, but there were none. I walked to the stairwell and looked down toward the front entrance. The glass door at the bottom showed the empty parking lot. My car was the only one there. No sign of the girl. As I turned back, something caught my eye near the front door. The keypad mounted beside it was blinking. That keypad hadn't worked since the day I moved in, ever. Pressing the buttons did nothing, no light, no sound. Seeing it blink now sent a chill through me. I tested the door anyway. It locked like normal. I headed back upstairs, uneasy but trying to stay rational. That's when I saw the open door. It was on the second floor, one of the vacant units. The door stood open just enough to reveal darkness inside. I was sure it had been closed earlier. I would have noticed otherwise. The building had become so empty that any change stood out immediately. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing unnaturally loud. No response. I didn't investigate further. I went straight back to my apartment, locked the door, and leaned against it, heart pounding. The silence pressed in again, heavier now, like the building was holding something back. Less than 10 seconds later, someone knocked. This time, the sound was right in front of me. 3 loud knocks. I didn't move. The knocking came again, harder. I took a step back and looked through the peephole. A man stood on the other side of the door. He wore dark clothing, a hood pulled low over his face. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could tell he was standing too close. His shoulder nearly touched the door. His posture was tense, like he was braced for something. He knocked again, once, slow and deliberate. I stepped away from the door, my pulse roaring in my ears. Then I heard something else. Footsteps, more than one set. Muffled voices whispering in the hallway beyond my door. That's when panic fully set in. I grabbed my phone and dialed emergency services, keeping my voice low as I explained what was happening. My eyes darted around the apartment, searching for somewhere to hide. There wasn't much. One bedroom, a bathroom, a small balcony off the living room with blinds covering the glass. I slipped onto the balcony and closed the door quietly behind me, pulling the blinds just enough to see through the cracks. Moments later, I heard my front door open. Light spilled into the apartment as two men stepped inside. They moved slowly, deliberately, scanning the space. One of them passed close to the balcony door, close enough that I could hear him breathing. I pressed myself flat against the wall, afraid that even the sound of my heartbeat might give me away. They searched for what felt like forever before leaving just as quietly as they came. I stayed there in the cold until the police arrived. They found no one else in the building, and according to their records, I really was the only tenant left. That was only the beginning. The police stayed for nearly an hour that night. They searched every floor, every vacant unit, the basement, the roof access, even the locked maintenance rooms the landlord barely remembered existed. Flashlights cut through dust and cobwebs, radios crackled softly, boots echoed where no footsteps had echoed in months. And yet, they found nothing. No men, no signs of forced entry, no evidence that anyone other than me had been inside the building at all. That should have made me feel safer. It didn't. One of the officers asked me again about the girl, her costume, her height, her face. I answered as clearly as I could, but even as I spoke, doubt crept in. The details felt slippery, like they didn't want to stay put in my memory. I knew she'd been real. I knew I'd spoken to her. But the longer the night stretched on, the more unreal the whole thing felt, like a dream I'd woken from too fast. Before they left, one officer paused at the front door and frowned at the keypad. "Strange thing," he said. "This model shouldn't even be powered anymore." He tapped it once. The light blinked again, then went dark. After they left, the building felt worse than it had before. Not empty, watched. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with every light on, listening. Every sound made my chest tighten. Pipes ticking, wind brushing against old brick. Somewhere deep in the building, something creaked slowly, like weight shifting. Morning came eventually, pale and gray through the windows. I called in sick to work and spent the day packing a bag, telling myself I'd just stay with a friend for a few nights. I didn't want to admit what I already knew. I wasn't coming back. Before leaving, curiosity pushed me to do one last thing. I walked the halls again. I started on the top floor and worked my way down, peering into each vacant unit through cracked doors or grimy windows. Most were exactly what you'd expect. Empty rooms, old carpets, furniture left behind by people who didn't want to carry it anymore. But the second floor unit, the one I'd seen open the night before, was different. Inside, the air felt warmer, stale but disturbed. Footprints marked the dust on the floor, fresh ones, more than one set. Near the back wall, beneath a boarded-up window, I found something that made my stomach drop. A small plastic mask. A child's mask. It was the same one the girl had worn. I didn't touch it. I backed out of the room slowly and left the building without looking back. For a while after that, nothing happened. I stayed with friends, slept on couches, tried to act normal. The police followed up once, then stopped calling. No suspects, no leads, no explanation. Eventually, the building was condemned due to structural issues and boarded up completely. I told myself that was the end of it. I was wrong. The second incident happened 3 months later after I'd moved into a different place across town. New apartment, new locks, new routine. I worked nights at a small shipping warehouse on the edge of the industrial district, the kind of place no one noticed unless they had business there. For most of the shift, I was alone. At first, the quiet felt familiar, comforting even. Rows of metal shelves stretched out like corridors. The hum of the lights overhead gave the space a sense of order, predictability. I told myself this was different. This was normal. Then I heard footsteps. They were faint at first, slow, careful, coming from near the front office. I pulled out one earbud and listened. Nothing. I went back to work, but the feeling didn't leave. A few minutes later, I heard them again, this time closer. "Hello?" I called, forcing confidence into my voice. "Anyone there?" No answer. I checked the office. Empty. Checked the break room. Empty. I told myself it was nothing. Old buildings make noise. Your mind fills in gaps when you're alone too long. An hour later, I saw him. I was in the office finishing paperwork when movement caught my eye through the window overlooking the warehouse floor. A silhouette passed between the shelves. Tall, slow, intentional. I stood so fast my chair tipped over. "Hey!" I shouted. The figure disappeared. I grabbed the first thing within reach, a heavy metal tool from the desk, and stepped onto the warehouse floor. Every step echoed. My own breathing sounded too loud. I walked aisle by aisle, calling out, checking corners, feeling increasingly foolish and increasingly afraid. At the back wall, I paused. Every row behind me was empty. That's when I heard the door open. It came from a side corner I hadn't checked yet. A heavy metal door creaked, slowly, deliberately. I turned just in time to see a man step into view at the far end of the hall. He looked wrong. Too thin, too tense. His eyes were wide, unfocused, like he was staring through me instead of at me. He didn't speak, didn't blink. He just stood there, gripping something in his hand. I told him to leave, told him security was on the way. My voice shook despite my efforts. He took a step forward, then another. That's when I saw what he was holding. A metal wrench. He hurled it without warning, and it missed my head by inches and smashed into the doorframe beside me with a deafening clang. I ran. I don't remember how fast I moved, only that fear took over completely. I slammed myself into the office, locked the door, and pressed my weight against it as he hit it again and again from the other side. When he realized he couldn't get in, he moved to the window, slamming his fists against the thick glass, his face twisted with something between rage and delight. Then, just as suddenly, he stopped. He turned away and walked off into the darkness of the warehouse, disappearing between the shelves. The police arrived eventually. Cameras showed him entering hours earlier, wandering the building, watching me, waiting. They never found him. After that, everything clicked into place in the worst way possible. The girl, the building, the men, the warehouse, they weren't random. They were attempts, tests, ways to see how close they could get, how easily they could make me open a door, step into a hallway, be alone. I quit my job. I moved again, changed routines, changed routes. For a long time, nothing happened. But sometimes, late at night, when the world goes quiet, I think I hear footsteps outside my door. Slow, familiar, careful, and I never answer.
They don't tell you how loud silence can be until you're trapped inside it. When I took the overnight job at the distribution depot outside of Redfield Junction, I thought the worst part would be boredom. The place sat just beyond the last stretch of town, wedged between a dead highway and a line of woods that swallowed light even during the day. From the road, it looked like nothing. Just a low concrete rectangle with 3 loading bays and a handful of dim security lights that buzzed and flickered when the wind picked up. I needed the money, that was the truth of it. I'd just moved out of a bad apartment situation and couldn't afford to be picky. Night work paid a little more, and for the first few weeks, I wasn't alone. There were always 1 or 2 other guys on shift. We barely talked, but the sound of someone else breathing in the same building mattered more than I realized at the time. Then the schedule changed. Budget cuts, slow season, fewer shipments coming in. One night, my supervisor pulled me aside and told me I'd be running the graveyard shift solo for a while. Midnight to 6 in the morning. Easy work, he said. Scan pallets, log inventory, lock up before sunrise. I nodded and pretended it didn't bother me. The first night alone wasn't bad. The building felt different, sure, but not threatening, just empty. Rows and rows of metal shelving stretched into darkness, stacked high with boxed goods and shrink-wrapped pallets. Overhead lights hummed softly, leaving long shadows between aisles. The office sat in the back corner, separated by a narrow hallway and a reinforced door with a small window cut into it. I kept one earbud in, music low. The silence pressed in otherwise. By the second week, I started noticing things. Sounds that didn't belong to the building. At night, machines don't cover noise the way they do during the day. Every footstep echoes, every shift of weight carries. You start to recognize the normal sounds quickly. The click of cooling metal, the distant hum of transformers, the occasional groan of the roof settling. So when I heard footsteps for the first time, I noticed. They were faint, slow, coming from the direction of the front office. I stopped scanning and pulled my earbud out, holding my breath. The sound stopped almost immediately, like it had been cut off mid-step. "Hello?" I called out, forcing my voice to sound casual. Nothing answered. I stood there for a full minute, listening. My heart slowed. I told myself it was the building. Old places make noise, everyone knows that. I put my earbud back in and kept working. The footsteps came back 20 minutes later. This time, they were closer. I took both earbuds out and listened properly. There was no mistaking it now. Someone was walking. Slow, deliberate steps spaced evenly apart. Not hurried, not lost. Purposeful. I called my supervisor's name first. He'd stopped by unannounced before, and it had scared the hell out of me then, too. No response. The footsteps stopped again. I walked toward the front of the building, every sense on edge. The office was dark when I flipped on the light. Empty. Break room empty too. No signs of anyone else. I stood there longer than I needed to, convincing myself it was nothing. When I finally turned the lights back off and headed to the floor, the warehouse felt colder, bigger, like the shadows had stretched while I wasn't looking. An hour passed without incident. I relaxed enough to put one earbud back in. That's when I saw him. I was seated at the office desk, logging scans into the computer when movement flickered in the window that overlooked the warehouse floor. Just a shape slipping between 2 aisles of shelving. Too tall to be a trick of light, too smooth to be my imagination. I shot to my feet so fast my chair slammed into the wall. "Hey!" I shouted. The shape vanished. Adrenaline hit hard and fast. I grabbed the first thing my hand landed on, an old steel tool someone had left on the desk, and stepped out of the office. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud. The warehouse lights didn't reach far between the aisles, leaving narrow corridors of shadow where anything could be hiding. I started walking aisle by aisle, calling out, telling whoever was there they weren't supposed to be, that security was on the way. My voice didn't sound convincing, even to me. Each aisle was empty. Boxes, pallets, dust. When I reached the far back wall, my stomach dropped. Every row behind me was clear. There was nowhere someone could have gone without me seeing them. That's when I heard a door open. It came from one of the side corridors near the back of the building.
offices that had been abandoned years ago, storage rooms filled with broken equipment. I turned slowly, heart hammering. The door creaked again. I stepped closer, gripping the metal tool so tightly my fingers hurt. The corridor behind was dim, lit by a single flickering light. At the far end, a figure stood motionless. He was young, early 20s maybe, but something about him felt off immediately. His clothes were dirty, his posture too rigid. His eyes were wide in a way that made my skin crawl. Not fear, not surprise. Fixation. I told him he needed to leave, told him this was private property, told him I'd already called security, which was a lie. He didn't react. He just stared at me, breathing shallow and fast. Then he stepped forward. I raised the tool, backing up instinctively. I tried to keep talking, to sound authoritative, but my voice cracked. That's when I noticed what he was holding. A heavy metal wrench. He didn't warn me, didn't shout. He just threw it with everything he had. It missed my head by inches and smashed into the doorframe beside me with a sound so loud it felt like my ears burst. I ran. I sprinted for the office, hearing his footsteps pounding behind me. He was fast, too fast. I didn't dare look back again until I slammed the office door shut and locked it, throwing my weight against it as he hit it hard from the other side. The reinforced door held. For now. He moved to the window next, slamming his shoulder into the glass again and again, his face twisted with something between rage and excitement. His breath fogged the window as he stared straight at me, smiling slightly, like this was a game he'd been waiting to play. Then, without warning, he stepped back, turned, and walked away into the darkness between the shelves, as calmly as if nothing had happened. I stayed in that office until sunrise. The police came. They found signs of forced entry, footage of him wandering the warehouse for hours before I ever noticed him, watching, waiting. But they never found him. And that should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Because after that night, I started to understand something terrible. Whoever he was, he hadn't come to steal anything. He'd come to see how alone I really was.
I didn't quit after that night. People always expect me to say that I did, that I walked away, never looked back, changed my number, moved to another state. That would have been the smart thing, but fear doesn't always push you forward. Sometimes it pins you in place. I told myself it was a one-off, a drifter, someone desperate or high or mentally unwell who had found an unlocked door and wandered in. The police had taken my statement, nodded sympathetically, and promised extra patrols. My supervisor apologized in the hollow way people do when it costs them nothing. The locks were replaced, a new camera was added near the side corridor. And then life, as it tends to do, kept going. The next shift back felt like stepping into a memory rather than a building. Every aisle looked longer, every shadow felt intentional. I double-checked doors obsessively. I kept all the lights on, even the ones management preferred to leave dark to save electricity. I didn't wear earbuds anymore. The silence was worse without them. For 3 nights, nothing happened. No footsteps, no movement on the cameras. I started to breathe again, cautiously, like someone testing ice after it's already cracked once. On the 4th night, the restroom light was on when I arrived. I knew I'd turned it off before leaving the previous morning. I remembered it clearly because I'd stood there in the doorway, staring down the dark corridor, convincing myself I was being paranoid. I stood frozen in the entrance for a long time, keys still in my hand, staring at that faint glow at the end of the hall. It wasn't bright, just enough to say someone had been there. I checked every camera feed before stepping inside. All clear, empty aisles. No movement. The timestamps were normal. I locked the front door behind me and walked slowly toward the restroom, heart pounding hard enough that I felt it in my throat. The light was on. The sink was wet. The mirror had been wiped clean in a rough oval shape,
like someone had leaned close enough to fog it with their breath and then cleared it with their sleeve. I didn't use that restroom again after that. I locked it and shoved a heavy cart in front of the door. It didn't make me feel safer, it just made me feel less exposed. That was the night the notes started. The first one was subtle, a scrap of brown packing paper tucked beneath the keyboard in the office. I didn't notice it until I reached for my coffee and felt it brush my hand. Just 3 words, written in blocky, uneven letters. You missed me. My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might pass out. I checked the cameras again, cycling through every angle, every corridor. Nothing. No one. I crumpled the note and threw it away. Then, after a moment of hesitation, I dug it back out and shoved it into my pocket instead. I don't know why. Proof, maybe. Or fear that if I let it go, it would mean admitting it was real. The next note appeared 2 nights later, this one taped to the underside of my desk. You locked the wrong door. I didn't finish my shift. I left early, told my supervisor I was sick, and drove home with my hands clenched so tight on the steering wheel my knuckles ached. Sleep didn't come easily after that. Every sound outside my apartment made my heart race. Every shadow on the wall felt like it was leaning closer. I started checking locks 3-4 times before bed. And then I saw him again. Not at the warehouse, at a rest stop. I was driving home just before dawn after another sleepless shift. I hadn't eaten, hadn't slept, and my head felt thick and heavy. I pulled off the highway to use the bathroom and splash water on my face. The parking lot was mostly empty. One semi-truck idled near the far edge. A few cars slept quietly under yellow sodium lights. As I stepped out of my car, I felt it. That same pressure between my shoulders. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. He stood near the vending machines, pretending to read the instructions. Same build, same posture, same too still way of standing. He didn't look at me directly, but I saw his reflection in the glass. His eyes tracked me as I moved. I didn't confront him. I didn't freeze. I walked back to my car as calmly as I could manage, every nerve screaming. I got inside, locked the doors, and watched him in the rearview mirror. He smiled. Not wide, not exaggerated, just enough to let me know he recognized me too. When I pulled away, he didn't follow. That was worse than if he had. From that night on, he started showing up everywhere. Not directly, not in ways I could point to and say, there he is, but in reflections, in crowds, in places where no one ever looked quite long enough to be sure. A man standing too close behind me in line at the grocery store. Someone sitting in the back row of a late movie. A figure on the opposite platform at the train station staring down the tracks instead of the train. Always gone by the time I turned fully towards him. The warehouse escalated too. Doors unlocked I knew I'd secured, cameras turned slightly off angle, footprints in the dust between aisles that ended abruptly, as if the person had simply stopped existing mid-step. The final night came without warning. I was finishing inventory early, planning to leave the moment the clock hit 6. My nerves were shot. I hadn't slept more than a few hours and days. The building felt wrong from the moment I stepped inside, heavier than usual, like the air itself was pressing down. At 3:12 a.m., the power went out. Not just the lights, everything. The hum of electricity vanished, plunging the warehouse into absolute darkness. Emergency lights should have kicked on. They didn't. I stood there, blind, listening to my own breathing. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, unhurried, coming from everywhere at once, echoing between shelves. I backed toward the door, hands shaking, heart slamming against my ribs. I felt along the wall until my fingers found the door handle. It wouldn't turn. Something heavy leaned against the other side. His voice came through the door, calm and almost conversational. You always run. The handle rattled slightly as he tested it. He continued. I waited. You never noticed how long I waited. The emergency lights flickered on suddenly, bathing the warehouse in red. I saw his shadow through the frosted glass, stretched and warped. You like rules, doors, locks, cameras. They make you feel real safe. The shadow moved away. I didn't wait. I grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and smashed the office window, crawling through and hitting the floor hard on the other side. The warehouse stretched out in front of me, red lights flashing, alarms blaring somewhere far away. I ran. He didn't chase me. That was the worst part. I made it to the loading bay and burst through the exit door into the cold night air. My car sat alone under the flickering lights. I fumbled with the keys, heart in my throat. Behind me, from the open bay door, his voice drifted out one last time. Highways are full of places to stop. I drove until the sun came up. I never went back. I quit without notice, left the city within a week, and moved somewhere smaller, quieter, farther from highways and rest stops, and places where people pass through without being remembered. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving a back road and the radio crackles with static, I catch my reflection in the windshield and my heart skips. Because for just a second, it looks like someone else is sitting behind me, watching, waiting. And I know, deep down, that predators like him don't haunt buildings. They haunt roots.